Hey there people, how you doing? Well, we have our first camera comparison for the X70 Pro Plus right here. It goes up against the S21 Ultra, and well, I can tell you right now, even though I haven't seen everything, like all the samples, I'm pretty damn excited about the portrait mode and the night mode on the X70, because in general, the X60 Pro Plus, this one's predecessor, was already really good with photography as a whole, but well, they say they've improved, and so I'm really excited to see exactly what it brings on board. Alright, so we're starting off with daylight images, and I know this is going to be a pretty long comparison, but I do recommend sticking around because night mode gets just insane. It's wild. And you'll know what I'm talking about pretty soon. But for this image, I think it's pretty obvious. We have slightly better shadow detail on the X70. Not sure why the S21 is crushing things here. And the colors look a lot better on the X70 as well. Honestly, I really like how Vivo processes colors as a whole. I mean, the S21 is not bad, but to my eyes, the X70 is a pretty clear winner. For this ultra-wide shot, it's a pretty similar story. Basically, I just like the colors of the X70 by far. Again, the S21 is not bad, but you know, the X70 and its color tones, it just got some kind of weird magic there that just sways me towards it. But anyways, another difference I did notice is that upon zooming in, we have slightly better sharpness on the X70 Pro Plus. I do see a little bit more over sharpening on the X70 as well, but in general I found that details tend to be better on the X70. But now we've got high resolution, and one thing you'll notice immediately is that the S21 Ultra, even though it is shooting 108 megapixels, we have better dynamic range. The sky is perfectly exposed here. We also get better details on the S21 Ultra. Essentially, somehow the S21 manages to process more megapixels while also managing to give us proper HDR processing. This is definitely one of the biggest upsides the S21 has for its main camera compared to the X70 Pro Plus or many other cameras which use high resolution at this point. So yeah, pretty big win for the S21 here. But on the ultra wide, we do get 48 megapixel images on the X70. Essentially, this is where the X70 pulls ahead. There is, of course, a slight loss in dynamic range, but you'll notice that there is a severe lack of over-sharpening on the X70, to the point that I wish there was a little bit of sharpening in there. Like, I can see some minor details on the S21 Ultra a little bit more than the X70, but in general, I genuinely believe that the X70 is doing a really good job here. The S21 Ultra is pulling out a lot of details, but at the expense of some artifacting in there. Now let's check out zoom. So we have multiple zoom cameras for both of these phones. This is 2 times, and it is optical on the X70, whereas digital on the S21 Ultra. And in this case, of course, optical zoom is gonna give us better details, less over sharpening and all that. But then if you go to 3 times zoom, this is where the S21 Ultra pulls ahead with proper optical zoom, and of course the S21 has better details here. But then again at 5 times zoom, we get better details on the X70 Pro Plus thanks to the optical zoom it has. Now that said, I do believe that the X70 could have really used a nice upgrade to the sensor for the periscope zoom. Although I do want to point out that the processing on the X70 has improved a good bit, to the point that I think it sort of makes up for the lack of good hardware. And I mean, at 10x, do I really need to say anything? It's the S21 Ultra's game right here. Anything 10x and beyond is gonna be the best looking on the S21 Ultra. And the X70, it does have better colors and contrast in my opinion, but the details are obviously getting smeared up. There is some artifacting going on compared to the complete optical sharpness that we get on the S21 Ultra. Alright, moving on, now we have macro, and there is just one difference here. The S21 Ultra can get a little bit closer, physically speaking, to the subject compared to the X70, and that's basically it. Everything else like quality, sharpness and all that, it's all pretty much the same. Alright, now things are gonna get pretty interesting. So this is portrait mode on both of these phones, and the reason I say interesting is not in this shot, it's in the next one, but this is like a normal portrait mode on auto, and essentially both are doing a great job. I do prefer it on the X70 because there is more overall brightness on the subject, that is me, and I just like the contrast on the X70 a little bit more. And yes, I do appreciate the fact that we get not only better bokeh in the background, but also more saturation in the skin tones. But then, we also get biotar mode on the X70 Pro Plus. This essentially gives a swirling bokeh effect in the background that I honestly am a huge fan of. It doesn't look 100% natural, at least in this case, but in general, it can look very pleasing to the eyes. And once again, I do appreciate that it is sort of giving us more contrast on the subject, and it just makes everything pop on the X70 compared to the S21 Ultra, which looks just a slight bit muted, with also a severe lack of bokeh balls once again. Now that biotar effect was part of Zeiss portraits on the X70 Pro Plus. Essentially, we have multiple ones of these now, and this is the planar mode, which is honestly my favorite, and I'm not really gonna change it after this point because, it just gives such insanely good results. Although in this case, I can understand that, I'm wearing a white mask, so the added contrast kind of makes it bloom a little, but it's still not completely blown out. Here's another planar portrait on the X70 Pro Plus, and you can really just see it, the extra contrast, just the overall pop in the image, especially on the subject, it really looks good. And of course, the delicious bokeh in the background. Do I even need to mention that? Alright, so portraits in general, quite impressive on the X70 Pro Plus. Definitely better than I had expected, which is quite hard to say given how high my expectations are for this device. But that said, I'm kind of excited about comparing the X70 to the iPhone 13 Pro, which at this very moment is sort of my reigning champ for portrait mode. So probably the next video is gonna be the iPhone 13 Pro versus X70 Pro Plus camera comparison. So if you enjoyed the stuff, do hit the subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. Now for this selfie though, we have two approaches here. The S21 Ultra is focusing on the subject and maintaining proper contrast and skin tones, while the X70 is trying to balance everything out. Now we have seen that before in the X60 Pro Plus as well, and essentially I'm not a fan of the X70's approach. It's not wrong or anything like that, it can be entirely preference based, but to my eyes, I think the S21 is better here, even though it is a bit blown out. Now here's another selfie, and this time you might be wondering why the S21 looks so warm, because that is exactly how it looked. This is just a little bit before sunset, so we get that warmth from the sunlight. And well, the X70, it's obviously balancing it out a bit too much. Also, it doesn't exactly help that the building in the background is sort of blown out on the X70 compared to much better maintained on the S21 Ultra. So in general, I think selfies, unlike portraits, are actually better on the S21 Ultra. I mean, we could say the same for the selfie portrait right here. It just looks a bit too bright on the X70. The S21 Ultra is maintaining the contrast much better, and honestly, I just prefer it right there. Now this shot, oh boy, yeah, this is apparently an insanely difficult shot to take, being backlit like that. But, I once again like the approach on the X70 this time around because it is focusing on the contrast and the skin tones of the subject while letting the background just completely blow out. That said, the S21 is giving you a more arguably balanced result, so choose whichever one you think looks best for you. Now switching back to the rear cameras, this time for night mode portraits. Yep, it is better on the X70 Pro Plus, I have no doubt about that. Clearly the S21 Ultra is not handling the scene properly, and of course multiple shots were taken, and this is essentially the same result all around. We get that weird green seeping in from the bottom, and the skin tones look completely desaturated. I'm almost looking like a dead body right there. But selfie night mode on the other hand is better on the X70 Pro Plus, a lot of back and forth indeed. It's just that Vivo's selfie night mode in general isn't very nice because it smooths things out just way too much. It also doesn't help that there is still a little bit noise in the background. But yeah, essentially I think the S21 deserves a win here. Now night mode, selfie portraits. Yep, it's quite a mouthful. Essentially it's present on the S21 Ultra versus not on the X70 Pro Plus. Yet I just cannot wrap my head around the fact that despite not having night mode, the X70 looks this good. It's been the case on the X60 Pro Plus as well, so I don't really know what Vivo is doing, but it clearly works because you get this image on the X70, which of course it doesn't really have proper contrast like the S21 Ultra, but still, the S21 took a 2-second exposure. The X70 did not, so clearly the processing is leaps and bounds ahead in that regard. Speaking of processing, of course, we gotta check out rear camera night modes, and trust me when I say this is where things get kinda crazy. I mean, not in this shot, but in general. So here, once again, colors are just straight up better on the X70 Pro Plus, so much more natural compared to the bluish green we have on the S21 Ultra. the X70 is my clear choice here. For this ultra-wide shot though, I kinda like how the S21 Ultra is darkening the sky while the X70 looks a bit faded, although once again colors look better on the X70 and I do notice more detail on the X70 as well. Now I did try to take some close-up shots here, and essentially the S21 Ultra struggles a lot more than the X70 as it would appear. So what happens is usually even micro jitters this up close can cause shakes and motion blur on the S21 Ultra, while the X70 somehow manages to negate all of that. Now here's another ultra-wide shot, and in this case, I really like the X70. It's got better shadow detail and just the colors, once again, I mean, I'm just repeating myself over and over like a broken record at this point, but those colors, man, they just look so natural. And upon zooming in, there is a minor difference in detail. I do notice a little bit more definition in those far off leaves compared to the S21 Ultra on the X70, but you know, it's a small difference to be honest. Much bigger differences are coming by the way, so don't just leave yet. But before that, let's check out zoomed in night mode. So we get 2 times on the X70 versus 3x on the S21 Ultra, and well, both are pretty good. They have nice sensors, the processing is good. The only gripe on the X70 for the first time in this entire comparison is that the colors don't really look good. That's quite something, eh? I mean, other than one of the selfies, but even so, it's kind of weird to see that the X70 did not nail colors while the S21 Ultra is doing a ridiculously good job here. So for 5x zoom though, the S21 Ultra actually looks better even though it's hybrid digital zoom, while the X70, even with optical zoom, it's not doing a really good job here. Now according to me, I think what's happening is that the X70 is just unable to utilize the 5x zoom camera because it's just not high quality enough to receive the light and really give a proper image. And then at 10x zoom for the S21 Ultra, the image didn't really turn out proper apparently. Clearly there's some weird issue going on here with the subject, so I did take another indoors. And yes, it did work out properly this time. Honestly, both look pretty good. The X70 once again looks kind of soft, and in general there is a lot more sharpening artifacts on the X70. It's probably because it's just not using the 5x zoom camera. While the S21 Ultra, you'll notice that there is depth of field in there. That's probably because it is using the 10x zoom camera and we can get an optically zoomed in night mode shot, which does look really crisp right there. Now another place where both these phones look insanely crisp is with the moon. Essentially this is 30 times zoom on both, and the processing on the X70 is so damn good that it actually looks identical to the S21 Ultra, except for actually better colors on the X70 as well. You know, that weird magenta on the S21 Ultra, that's obviously not how it really looked. So yeah, it's kind of surprising to see that although normal zoomed in images don't look as good on the X70, the moon clearly does. Now if you have seen any of my X60 Pro Plus camera comparisons, you'd know at this point that I am a ridiculously huge fan of night mode styles. And that does not change at this point, because not only do we get the previous night mode styles and they are in their full glory and quality right there, we also get 2 new ones that I really like. Firstly, there's a dreamlike look, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I mean, it looks cool and all, but what I really like is a black and white textured look. That one looks kind of better than I'd expected, to be honest. So yeah, essentially night mode styles is still my favorite feature throughout any smartphone camera feature that we have had so far. I mean, I could go on and on about this, but if you have been following through with this channel, and thank you for that by the way, then you're probably tired of me just talking about the same feature over and over. So instead, let's move on to ultra low light, this time with the main cameras, and well, one of the major things that I'm looking at is a lot more noise on the S21 Ultra. And guess what, we have better shadow detail on the X70. But that's of course not all. If we zoom in, you'll notice that not only do we get better details, but there is so much more artifacting and noise going on the S21 Ultra. It's very noticeable and definitely not nice to see. Now this shot, well, if you remember, at the beginning of the video I had said that night mode gets crazy. Well, this is where it's at. So this is an ultra wide shot, top down, and obviously the X70 is brighter, it's producing an equally clean image as the S21 Ultra, and upon zooming in just a little bit, you'll notice it has just a teensy bit more detail as well. But that's not the crazy part. I mean, I had expected the X70 to perform better, obviously, but the crazy part is in the exposure time. So the S21 Ultra in this case took 8 seconds of exposure. I mean, you can understand, right? Holding the camera in a top-down angle for 8 seconds and trying to hold it still. It's kind of a nightmare, to be honest. But the X70 Pro Plus, I can bet my bottom dollar you will not guess how long it took. It's 2 seconds. I'm sure you were guessing something like 10 or 12 seconds of exposure, but no, it took 2 seconds and produced this high quality of an image. I mean, yes, there is a hardware difference, but that doesn't exactly explain how the X70 could do something like this. That's entirely on the processing being ridiculously good. Now, I did take another ultra-wide shot, this time with even lower light compared to the previous one. I mean, at this point, I could barely see anything at all. But apparently these two phones can do quite well here. So the S21 Ultra this time took about a 9-second exposure, while the X70 Pro Plus, it took a 5-second one. I mean, it didn't go as crazy as 2 seconds, but still, that's lower than the S21 Ultra. But you'll notice that the X70 is producing a brighter and slightly sharper image. If you zoom in, you'll notice it. And it's about as clean as the S21 Ultra. I mean, I do want to give credit to the S21 Ultra for giving us such a clean image in such low light, with the ultra-wide camera that too. But man, the X70 Pro Plus with its ultra-wide night mode, damn, that's some seriously good stuff right there. It really shows that the X70 isn't entirely dependent on the hardware, which is very good by the way, but its processing can do a lot now. So that is the end of our camera comparison, and man, was it a long one. I'll try and keep the conclusion short, but in general, personally speaking, I like the colors on the X70 Pro Plus, I like the portraits on the X70 Pro Plus, but the selfies on the other hand, I think those are better on the S21 Ultra, whether it's normal selfies, portrait selfies, or even night mode selfie. I just happen to like it better on the S21 Ultra. Now night mode on the other hand, well, yeah, the X70 Pro Plus is the new king, apparently. I mean, the S21 Ultra is very strong with night mode, but you saw right there, when the light got dim, basically the X70 Pro Plus just strolled ahead. It really goes to show just how much effort and attention to detail has been put on the X70 Pro Plus's photography. Honestly, I'm very impressed by the X70 Pro Plus here. You might think I'm acting like a fanboy, but I'm just appreciating really good photography for what it is. That's all there is. So, with that said, I do hope you guys enjoyed this one. I mean, I sure as hell did. And if you did, do hit that like button, and of course subscribe for many more camera comparisons to come, and I'll be seeing you guys later. Cheers.